these cashmere gloves I need, as it is winter, and I have hands. So, that's all.
I'll buy these and these alone.
Now walk away. Strong and frugal. Oh my god! Fuji boots.
Imagine this, you're scrolling through TikTok, and instead of another haul video showing off a pile of trendy clothes, you see someone swearing off shopping altogether. No new clothes. This is the no-buy movement, and it's taking over social media. What started as a personal finance challenge has turned into a full-blown cultural rebellion. People are rejecting influencer-driven consumerism, pushing back against fast fashion microtrends, and questioning why we're all so addicted to buying stuff we don't need. But here's the twist. This isn't the first time women have led a movement like this. Throughout history, women have been at the forefront of spending boycotts, rationing efforts, and anti-consumerist activism. From World War II's thrift culture to the Great Depression's DIY fashion to the 1970s environmentalism. These movements weren't just about saving money. They were about resisting societal pressures and reshaping cultural norms. So is today's no-buy movement a real, lasting shift? Or are we just reliving another cycle of temporary frugality before the next shopping frenzy takes over? Let's take a deep dive into the past and find out. Chapter 1, the rise of the no-buy movement. What's happening today? The no-buy movement is more than just a fleeting social media trend. It represents a deeper cultural shift questioning modern consumerism. In a world where shopping hauls, flash sales, and fast fashion microtrends dominate platforms like TikTok and YouTube, a growing number of people, particularly Gen Z, are stepping back and asking, do I actually need all this stuff? At its core, the no-buy movement is about abstaining from unnecessary purchases for a specific period. Some people commit to a month, a year, and even indefinitely without buying new clothes, makeup, or non-essential items. Others take a low-buy approach, setting strict limits on what they purchase while still allowing for occasional mindful spending. What began as a personal finance challenge has now evolved into a much bigger conversation about consumer culture, sustainability, and financial independence. The shift didn't happen in a vacuum. The widespread rejection of shopping and overconsumption is being fueled by several cultural and economic factors. The first major catalyst is disillusionment with influencer culture. For years, social media influencers have made careers out of convincing people to buy things. Whether it's sponsored beauty products, viral TikTok gadgets, or monthly Shein hauls, social media has encouraged hyperconsumption on an unprecedented scale. Every new trend brings a new must-have item, and for a while people eagerly played along. But now there's a shift. Consumers are pushing back against the endless cycle of buying. Enter de-influencing, a new wave of content creators who actively discourage people from purchasing trendy, overhyped products. Instead of saying you need this foundation that went viral on TikTok, these influencers are now saying you don't need this, it's overpriced, overhyped, and unnecessary. People are always feeling burnt out by fast fashion microtrends. Fashion used to move in decades, then in seasons, but today trends seem to last mere weeks before being replaced. And it's kind of true, to be honest, this is kind of why I stopped wearing jeans, because I feel like the trends started just changing too quickly and I couldn't keep up. And I also just can't find pants that are comfortable. And I just feel like I'd be like trapped in my skinny jean phase because I feel like the trends are just at a micro speed now. The clean girl aesthetic barely had a moment before being overshadowed by mob wife chic, which is already competing with electric grandpa fashion. The rapid turnover is exhausting, expensive, and environmentally disastrous. Many Gen Z consumers, realizing they're caught in an unsustainable loop of buying clothes that will be out of style in months, are choosing to opt out altogether. The no-buy movement offers an off-ramp from the endless treadmill of consumption. Another major reason for the rise of the no-buy movement is financial anxiety and economic instability. For many, shopping hauls aren't just excessive, they're unaffordable. Rising inflation, stagnant wages, and a worsening housing crisis have made disposable income feel like a luxury. People are reconsidering their spending habits out of sheer economic necessity. Buying another viral lip gloss, a $200 designer dupe, or $50 candle starts to feel ridiculous when you're struggling to pay your rent and make student loan payments. Social media trends like girl math, which humorously justify spending habits, highlight how much different people are analyzing and negotiating their financial choices. Meanwhile, the quiet luxury trend, where people favor understated, high-quality essentials over flashy, disposable fashion, reflects a broader cultural shift towards mindful, long-term spending rather than impulse buying. And it is true, if you buy like a high-quality coat that's like a classic style, that's really well made, I mean, you could wear that for like 10 years and it wouldn't really go out of style because it's classic. I mean, I've had a coat that I think I've had it for like 5 years now, and it just keeps going, and it is timeless, and I'll just keep wearing it. And the no-buy movement taps into the economic anxiety by offering a simple solution. Stop spending altogether. Instead of feeling guilty for not being able to afford the latest fashion or beauty trends, many participants are choosing to reject consumerism entirely. For some, this is a temporary financial reset. For others, it's a long-term lifestyle change. Beyond personal finance, minimalism and sustainability concerns are also major drivers behind the no-buy movement. Fast fashion and mass consumption have an enormous environmental impact, from unethical labor practices to massive textile waste and pollution. Gen Z in particular has been raised with an acute awareness of climate change as an existential threat, and that has shaped their approach to consumption. Many no-buy participants cite sustainability as their primary motivation, aiming to reduce their environmental footprint by breaking free from the buy and discard cycle. Instead of constantly buying and throwing away items, people are embracing thrift shopping, upcycling, and slow fashion. Some even view no-buy challenges as a form of activism, using their financial choices to reject exploitative labor practices, wasteful production, and corporate greed. And this isn't just about spending less, it's about aligning consumption with personal ethics. I mean, I used to work in a thrift shop in the donation center, and you would be shocked, like, at the amount of waste and volume of stuff that comes in. And I find even like appliances, like vintage electronics and appliances from like the 70s, those last forever, but now everything's built to self-destruct, I find. But is the no-buy movement truly a revolution, or are we simply reliving another cycle of temporary frugality? History tells us this isn't the first time women have resisted consumer culture. In fact, women have historically been at the forefront of spending boycotts, wartime rationing, and anti-consumerist activism. The current no-buy movement echoes past eras where women were either forced to choose or to limit their spending in response to larger economic, social, and political forces. One of the biggest historical parallels, World War II rationing and thrift culture. While today's no-buy movement is often a choice, women in the 40s had no option but to embrace frugality as a necessity. Let's take a look at how wartime thriftiness shaped spending habits and how it still influences us today. Chapter 2, World War II Rationing and the Birth of Thrift Culture. During World War II, consumer culture wasn't just discouraged, it was forcibly put on hold. With resources diverted towards the war effort, shopping and spending weren't just impractical, they were often impossible. Women who traditionally managed household purchases found themselves navigating a world of government-mandated rationing, fabric shortages, and strict consumption guidelines. They had to be resourceful, making do with what little they had, while still maintaining a sense of normalcy. Governments around the world place heavy restrictions on food, fabric, and other essential goods, limiting how much people could buy and controlling how materials were distributed. In the US and the UK, ration books became a part of daily life, dictating how much sugar, butter, gasoline, and even clothing people could purchase. Nylon, wool, and silk were redirected towards military uniforms, parachutes, and other wartime necessities, leaving women with little access to new clothes. Beauty products were also affected. Stockings became a rare luxury as silk and nylon were prioritized for war materials, leading women to paint their legs with leg makeup to mimic the look of stockings. With consumer goods in short supply, the government encouraged the philosophy of make do and mend. Instead of buying new clothes, women were urged to repair, repurpose, and creatively alter old garments to extend their lifespan. Sewing and mending became patriotic duties, and magazines were filled with tips on how to turn men's suits into women's dresses, refashion old coats into new ones, and make children's clothes from adult garments garments. And I just feel like everything was way better made back then. So like garments would last and things were just more expensive in terms like fashion. Like back in the day, people just weren't constantly buying new outfits for these trends every month. You know what I mean? Like things that you would buy because the trends would take so long to, cycle through, they would last for years. Hollywood and fashion magazines also reinforced this idea of patriotic frugality. Stars like Rita Hayworth and Katharine Hepburn were often photographed in reworked, minimalist outfits, proving that style didn't have to rely on excess. Ad campaigns encouraged women to take pride in their ability to stretch their resources, glamorizing wartime thriftiness as a noble sacrifice. In many ways, rationing became a form of national duty, and frugality was framed as a contribution to the war effort. Beauty routines also had to be adapted. With shortages on cosmetics, women found innovative ways to maintain their beauty routines without relying on store-bought products. Homemade face masks, DIY hair dyes, and even beet juice as a lipstick became popular hacks. Meanwhile, the government and media worked hard to keep up morale by emphasizing the importance of looking presentable despite the shortages. The push reinforced the idea that even in times of extreme frugality, style and self-care remained important. Once the war ended, the economic boom of the 50s led to a drastic shift back towards consumerism. With restrictions lifted and manufacturing booming, department stores flourished, fast fashion emerged, and shopping became a leisure activity rather than a necessity. Advertisements encouraged women to embrace luxury and indulge in the new abundance of consumer goods. Brands like Christian Dior capitalized on the shift with extravagant, voluminous silhouettes, directly countering the fabric-conserving, streamlined looks of wartime fashion. But despite this return to hyperconsumption, the wartime thrift mindset never truly disappeared. Many women, having spent years learning how to budget, repair, and repurpose, carry these habits into their post-war lives. The idea that fashion and beauty could be maintained without excessive spending had been deeply ingrained in a generation of women, laying the groundwork for future anti-consumerist movements. And it's true, if you were ever in a situation in your life where you had no money and you were saving and being thrifty, it's hard to break those habits in a way because you're just so ingrained in your head. And today's no-buy movement mirrors many of these wartime values. Just as World War II women found empowerment in frugality, modern consumers are rejecting overconsumption and embracing a more mindful, resourceful approach to fashion and beauty. Instead of being told to constantly buy new things, people are once again turning to upcycling, thrifting, and sustainable DIY solutions. However, World War II rationing was forced from anti-consumerism, dictated by external circumstances rather than personal choice. But what happens when economic crises, rather than war, shape spending habits? To answer that, we need to look at another major historical moment when frugality wasn't just a movement, it was a financial necessity, the Great Depression. Chapter 3, The Great Depression and DIY Fashion. The Great Depression of the 1930s was one of the most devastating economic crises in modern history, forcing millions of people to drastically alter their lifestyles. Unlike today's no-buy movement, which is often framed as a personal choice or ethical stance, frugality in the 1930s wasn't optional, it was a matter of survival. With soaring unemployment rates, mass poverty, and a near collapse of financial systems, consumer spending plummeted, not because people wanted to reject materialism, but because they simply couldn't afford to spend. For women, who were often responsible for household management, stretching every dollar became a necessary skill. Clothes shopping, once a sign of upward mobility, became a rare indulgence, and instead families relied on homemade, repurposed, or second-hand garments. Many women became expert seamstresses out of necessity, altering outdated styles, swapping clothes with neighbors, or finding creative ways to make garments last. Hand-me-downs were common, and fabric itself was often repurposed multiple times. A worn-out dress might be turned into a blouse, then into a child's outfit, and finally into rags for cleaning. Magazines and newspapers, understanding the financial strain of households, started publishing sewing tips, fabric preservation hacks, and step-by-step guides on making stylish clothing from what people already had. Patterns for women's and children's dresses were often included in print publications, teaching readers how to update old styles without purchasing new materials. This era also saw the rise of feed sack fashion, where women would repurpose the cloth from flour and grain sacks into dresses, skirts, and aprons. To appeal to this growing trend, companies began printing floral and patterned designs on the fabric of feed sacks, turning what was once a mundane storage item into fashionable and functional resource. Alongside this DIY fashion movement, there was a larger cultural shift towards anti-luxury, much like today's quiet luxury trend, where people avoid overtly flashy designer labels in favor of understated, high-quality pieces. Excessive displays of wealth in the 30s were seen as tone-deaf and insensitive. The Roaring Twenties era of opulence and extravagant spending had come to crashing halt, and in its place was a new expectation: modesty and financial prudence. For many, dressing too extravagantly during this time felt out of touch with the suffering of the broader population. Wealthy individuals often avoided flaunting their privilege, and even Hollywood, which had once been defined by glamorous, expensive costumes, began to shift towards more relatable, working-class fashion in its films. Some of the biggest stars of the decade, like Katharine Hepburn and Jean Arthur, popularized simple, practical styles, mirroring the economic hardships of the real world. Even in advertising, brands that once promoted luxury goods pivoted to frugality-focused marketing, emphasizing durability, quality, and long-term value over trendiness and excess. One of the most interesting parallels between the Great Depression and the modern no-buy movement is the backlash against perceived mindless consumerism. Today, many people are growing frustrated with influencer shopping hauls, fast fashion, and disposable trends, criticizing them as wasteful and out of touch. The same criticism existed in the 1930s, though instead of viral TikTok hauls, the resentment was directed at Hollywood elites and the remnants of the Jazz Age extravagance. Even those who had money to spend were hesitant to flaunt it, and the idea of quiet wealth took hold as the social norm. Though the Great Depression eventually ended, its legacy of forced thriftiness didn't disappear overnight. Many people who grew up in the 30s never fully embraced consumer culture again, even as the economy improved in the 40s and 50s. The idea of waste not, want not remained deeply ingrained in those who had lived through extreme financial hardship, and these values were passed down to future generations. The Depression-era emphasis on intentional slow fashion influenced later movements, including the DIY culture of the 70s and the modern minimalist trend. This raises an important question. Is today's no-buy movement simply a reaction to the economic hardship, much like the frugality of the Great Depression? Or is it a deeper, more permanent cultural shift away from consumer-driven identity? While history suggests that spending habits tend to rebound after economic downturns, the modern emphasis on sustainability and ethical shopping could mean that this time the rejection of consumerism is here to stay. To explore this, we need to look at another major trend of anti-consumerist sentiment: the environmentalist movement of the 70s. While the Great Depression forced people into frugality, the 1970s saw a new wave of people actively choosing to reject consumer culture, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Let's take a look at how this movement laid the groundwork for the sustainability-focused no-buy mindset we see today. Chapter 4: The 1970s Anti-Consumerist Movement and Women's Activism. By the time the 1970s arrived, the economic and social landscape had shifted once again. Unlike the forced frugality of the Great Depression or World War II rationing, the anti-consumerist sentiment of this era wasn't about necessity. It was a conscious rejection of mass consumption. For the first time, people weren't just being frugal because they had to. They were actively choosing to consume less as a form of activism, environmental consciousness, and feminist resistance. The environmental movement was a defining force of the decade, and it had a direct impact on consumer behavior. The first Earth Day in 1970 was a cultural turning point, sparking widespread discussions about waste, pollution, and the long-term consequences of overconsumption. People began to question the throwaway culture that had defined post-war consumerism, where products were built for convenience rather than longevity. Single-use plastics, cheap mass-produced fashion, and excessive packaging were increasingly seen as harmful rather than progressive. Women were at the forefront of the shift, particularly in the realm of fashion and shopping habits. The rise of thrift stores, homemade clothing, and upcycling was driven largely by the desire to reduce waste. The idea that you didn't need to constantly buy new things to be stylish became part of a growing counterculture movement. It wasn't just about personal finance or budgeting. It was about aligning consumption with values. This mirrors the modern no-buy movement, where participants see rejecting fast fashion as a way to resist the environmental destruction caused by the fashion industry. Slogans like "buy less, choose well, make it last" began to emerge, encouraging people to invest in quality over quantity. Rather than following rapidly shifting fashion trends, many people in the 70s embraced slow fashion, favoring durable, timeless pieces over cheaply made disposable garments. This shift in mindset is eerily similar to today's conversations about quiet luxury and capsule wardrobes, which focus on purchasing fewer but higher quality items. And beyond environmental concerns, second wave feminism also played a major role in shaping anti-consumerist attitudes among women. Feminists in the 1970s were highly critical of beauty and fashion industries, which they saw as mechanisms designed to profit off of women's insecurities. Beauty advertisements, for example, had long been centered on the idea that women needed to buy products to be attractive, youthful, and desirable. Many feminists in the movement pushed back against these narratives by rejecting makeup, high heels, and fashion trends that they believed were created to maintain male-dominated beauty standards. Instead of spending money on products that were marketed as essential to being a woman, some feminists chose minimalist, practical clothing and natural beauty as a form of political resistance. This mirrors today's de-influencing trend, where content creators push back against the beauty and fashion industry's endless cycle of consumption. Much like the feminists of the 1970s, many modern no-buy participants reject the idea that they need to constantly purchase new products to fit in or feel confident. The movement isn't just about saving money or reducing waste. It's also about reclaiming autonomy over spending choices and breaking free from industries that profit off of insecurity. The parallels between the 70s and today suggest that the no-buy movement is not just a passing phase, but a part of a larger historical cycle where people periodically push back against consumerist excess. Just as women in the 1970s challenged societal expectations around beauty, fashion, and spending habits, today's no-buy movement is rooted in a desire to opt out of a culture that promotes constant consumption. But with all these historical parallels, we have to ask, will today's no-buy movement stick around and create lasting change? Or will it eventually fade as consumer culture rebounds? Is this a genuine societal shift, or just another period of temporary anti-consumerism before the next wave of mass consumption takes over? To answer this question, we need to look at what happened after each of these past anti-consumerist movements. Did people truly change their habits, or did they return to old patterns once the economy improved and cultural trends shifted? Chapter 5, is the no-buy movement here to stay? The no-buy movement has undeniably gained momentum, with thousands of people embracing the idea of mindful spending, anti-consumerism, and sustainability. But is this just another temporary reaction to economic instability, or are we witnessing a true cultural shift away from materialism? Historically, periods of economic downturn have always led to waves of frugality. The Great Depression, World War II rationing, and even the 2008 financial crisis forced people to rethink their spending habits. But once economic conditions improved, spending rebounded, and consumerism returned with even greater force. Today we are in a similar situation, facing rising inflation, stagnant wages, and a housing crisis, all of which make excessive spending feel impractical. But will the no-buy mindset stick around even when financial insecurity improves? There are strong arguments for why the no-buy movement could become a long-term lifestyle shift rather than a passing trend. The fashion and beauty industries are among the biggest contributors to environmental damage, from textile waste and plastic pollution to unethical labor practices. Many people are becoming more conscious of how their shopping habits contribute to this crisis, leading them to opt for secondhand shopping, upcycling, and reducing unnecessary purchases. Unlike past frugality movements, which were largely driven by economic necessity, this one has a deeper ideological foundation, one that prioritizes emphasizes ethical consumerism and sustainability over financial constraints. And another reason why the no-buy movement might last is the economic reality for younger generations. Unlike baby boomers who experience economic prosperity and upward mobility, Gen Z and Millennials are facing sky-high living costs, crushing student debt, and stagnant wages. For many, the idea of shopping as a form of self-expression or entertainment is becoming increasingly impractical. They simply don't have the disposable income to keep up with the influencer-driven trends and fast fashion cycles. This shift in financial priorities could mean that frugality is not just a temporary response to tough times, but a long-term necessity. However, history suggests that consumer culture is incredibly resilient, and there are reasons to believe that the no-buy movement might fade as spending power increases. One of the strongest arguments against its longevity is the fact that economic recovery has always brought consumerism back in full force. After World War II, the 1950s saw an explosion of department stores, mass advertisements, and mass production. After the Great Depression, the 40s and 50s ushered in a new era of luxury goods and status-driven consumption. Even the 2008 financial crisis, which led to a wave of minimalism and mindful spending, was followed by a rise of fast fashion brands like Shein and an explosion of influencer shopping culture. Another major challenge is the power of marketing and corporate influence. Brands are constantly evolving to find new ways to entice consumers, even those who are actively trying to cut back. We've already seen companies co-opt sustainability and minimalism, turning them into marketable trends. Luxury brands now promote quiet luxury, while fast fashion brands offer conscious collections that claim to be sustainable but still encourage excessive consumption. Even thrift stores and secondhand fashion platforms, originally alternatives to fast fashion, have become highly commercialized, with resellers flipping vintage items for a profit and promoting constant wardrobe updates. The rise of social media and influencer culture also makes it difficult for people to fully detach from consumerism. Even among those who participate in the no-buy movement, there's still a cultural performing frugality online. Influencers document their no-buy journeys, showing how they restyle old outfits or challenge themselves to avoid shopping. But even this can be a form of content-driven consumerism, as people seek validation for their frugality in the same way they once sought validation for their purchases. So, is the no-buy movement truly a revolution in how we consume, or are we simply reliving another cycle of temporary frugality before the next shopping boom? The answer likely lies somewhere in the middle. While some people will permanently shift towards sustainable shopping and mindful consumption, others will inevitably return to old habits once economic conditions improve. The most significant long-term change might not be the complete rejection of consumerism, but rather a shift about how people engage with it, placing more emphasis on sustainability, ethical production, and thoughtful spending. If the no-buy movement is to have real staying power, it will need to go beyond personal finance challenges and social media trends. It will need to influence corporate policies, government regulations, and industry standards, pushing for a systemic change rather than just individual action. If brands continue to adopt to conscious consumer demands, prioritizing quality over quantity and ethical production over mass manufacturing, then perhaps the movement will have left a lasting impact on how we view consumption. In the end, the future of the no-buy movement depends on whether people see it as a temporary challenge or a fundamental shift in values. So what do you think? Will people continue to embrace intentional spending and sustainability, or will we eventually return to the impulse-driven shopping culture that has dominated for decades? And the answer may shape the next era of consumerism. So it's just so hard to say. I feel like people are just always going to shop no matter what. And it's just made so easy on social media to do so. And it definitely has a long history, and it is because inflation and things are expensive now. So I think that is a huge driving factor behind it. I mean, obviously too, a lot of these fashion brands, there's a lot of waste with them, because I've worked in clothing stores multiple times in my life. And when you're unpacking all the new clothing, and everything's wrapped in plastic 3 or 4 times. I mean, you really notice it when you're working in retail. And then when I was working on the other side of retail in a thrift store, I really noticed the waste as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few years. I think it's good that people are becoming more conscious, because sometimes it's easier to to forget too, of like where all the clothing is coming from and just being more aware of things. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future. Let me know in the comments below, like, what are your shopping habits? Have you ever tried the no buy movement? I think it'd be satisfying to try it for a few months just to like see if you can withhold from impulse buying. But I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong necessary to treat yourself with certain items too, but I think it's good to be mindful. All right, thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments below.